Welcome back to a rapid fire session of the Conversations Roundtable, specifically surrounding harassment. I am the founder and executive director of the Cosplayer Survivor Support Network, and we have this thing called the Harassment Policy Report Card on our website, cosplayer-ssn.org. Highly recommend you check it out if you go to conventions. We like to look at their policies to see how much they will protect you, because I guarantee everybody in this room right now, if you don't have your own story, you've heard a story from somebody. So let's chat about that real quick and what we can do to improve our community that way.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we start? Where should we start? I'll start by saying, anybody that's here right now, or anybody listening that's able to talk about their story, you are awesome, because these things are super sensitive, personal, and quite frankly life-changing for a lot of people. And to have that courage to be able to share it, make you a hero, no matter how you look at it. So I definitely appreciate anybody who's sharing for the better good, because it's a really, really, really important thing. And on the first part, we were kind of talking about having weapons at cons, not physical weapons, but like the knowledge of weapons, and being able to know your resources and so on. But when you kind of hear other people's testimonies and stuff, I think it kind of paints a picture for people to understand, like, what does harassment look like? Because I really do feel like that's kind of the root of where this all start. And I will honestly say that that's been my huge and biggest dilemma with this, is because people paint harassment as one way, and harassment is not bias.
It is not. Cosplay is not consent. That is not the situation.
Yep.
Oh my God. I can go on for days.
You can be in your 40s. You can be a teen. You can be a male. You can be a woman. You could be black. You could be white. Anybody could be harassed. And I think that the conversations have to start that harassment is harassment, no matter who you are, no matter how popular you are, no matter what type of notoriety you have, no matter if you have a blue check next to your name. I don't give a damn how many followers you have. Harassment is harassment. And I think that's where the conversations really need to start, where it needs to expose people for their wrongdoing and holding them accountable. And that's something I see in this community, where people are getting passes because of their accolades, and that's absolute BS to me.
Absolutely. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share right off the bat?
There was this convention I attended, and there was a person that I had previously blocked on my social media, because at one con they found out that I was doing pinup, because I also do pinup as a side hobby in addition to cosplay. And for some reason, he's like, "Oh yeah, like you do all that lewd stuff," and then he just started being a little bit nicer to me, and he just started just kind of like just treating me different in a way. Like, I thought we were like buddy, but now you're kind of looking at me at a different, like, you're not treating me like a friend, you're treating me like an object. So you know what? Bye, I'm blocking you. And I run into him at a convention, and just because you block someone on social media still means that, like, if you're in the same space, sometimes they don't get the message that, like, hi, I don't want you around, you know. And when I was at this particular convention, they started just giving me like this death glare, and I wanted to say something, but it just felt like, because I'm a very outspoken person, I've called out conventions on their crap a couple of times, but when someone who has been bothering you and just kind of like just making you feel uncomfortable, like sometimes you're just frozen right there, like, oh snap, what do I do, you know? And he perpetuated like this behavior throughout the con, and this particular convention doesn't have the best harassment policy. I love this con to death, but they really need to work on that, because there was really no one that I could really report this to, and really no one that I could really speak on this about. And then after the con, I just kind of like, we're all on social media, on our private social media, so I just kind of like just vent out my horror story. And a friend of mine, had the nerve, and by the way, they were wearing a Cosplay Is Not Consent badge throughout the whole weekend, and they had the nerve to tell me that, like, oh, you should just ditch your flight back to Los Angeles and just went to the San Jose Police Department if that was a problem. Like, I am not going to
No.
flight. You know how much flights cost?
Oh my God. I mean, not only
Yeah,
that,
wow.
but really quickly, like anybody who's a survivor of any kind of sexual violence or harassment knows that the police will do nothing.
Yep.
Especially if you are a person of color. If you're Black right now, do you really want to go to the police? I don't think so.
It's so safe there. I love it.
Oh, no.
Right? So there's that on top of the fact that you were saying, like, you know, the convention can't prevent that person from being there. A lot of conventions do not have policies for outside predators or people who have known to be stalking or harassing you outside of the event. There's nothing they can do unless it happens on the convention grounds during the convention and you report it to the proper place. So that really sucks. I am so sorry you went through that.
Yeah. And not only that, they also ask for like evidence or witnesses. And it's like, what if you're by yourself and your friends are not around? Like, you're literally not going to do anything because you're not taking my word for it. And for whatever reason, it's just, you know, what do you do?
Absolutely. And with that too, you know, the evidence asking, we are in a community. If somebody discloses to you what happened to them like that, you believe them first. I would rather believe somebody who ends up down the line being a false accuser than to say benefit of the doubt for the offender. Absolutely not conscionable. Like that's absolutely unconscionable in this community. And asking for evidence is not cool.
There's also evidence. Like I've seen, there's one photographer that loves to shoot like loots for men and underage boys. He approached me once. It was like, no, thank you. I ended up blocking him, but there was like plenty of evidence of him like coaxing underage high school kids to his hotel room. I flew all the way from Texas. Why are you not shooting with me?
Oh my God.
And he's still active. People are still posting his stuff. And I'm just like, I posted about him on my page. Nobody seems to really care. We have receipt. We have like text messages. We have DMs where nobody really cares. I think one of my friends even was like, we need to go to the FBI, but nobody cared.
No, I mean, we can't prevent those predators, and it sucks so much.
Yeah. And then, like, especially at the con scene, like, everybody who, like, I don't know, like, I feel like you have to be wary of photographers. You have to do research. You can't just, like, you know, do whatever who you work with, because also that's, like, a breeding ground for people who could be predators and could be, you know, not have good intentions for you. And considering that a lot of people who are just entering con scenes, who are new to that, who might have, you know, trouble saying no because it's like, oh, well, everybody's taking pictures of everybody, I guess, yeah, that's okay. And they might think that that's an industry standard because you're just entering this industry. That's a whole other discussion, because then it's like, oh, you could be taken advantage of and you might not even know it until like later. When it's too late.
As a photographer, I make it standing policy to never be with my model alone. And I almost always say, like, hey, if this is our first time shooting, I would love for you to bring a friend.
Same.
Make sure you bring a friend so that in case something goes wrong with your costume, or if you need somebody to hold your shit, you're going to have somebody you can trust who can, like, but honestly, like, I'm going to come clean with you guys. It's to cover my own ass, because, you know, it is a sword that cuts both ways. I would much rather sort of like have witnesses there to make sure that everything goes without any hitches, and so that there's no concerns or problems down the line. Because, like, you know, as the sad reality of it is that harassment is a thing that can cut both ways. So, you know, like you guys have pointed this out, is like nobody's really safe from it. And so, like, you always need to have that safety net.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, to build on what Nikki was saying, is that something like, obviously the comic book industry is extremely rife with harassment, and one of the main reasons I'm here is because of the so many of us, the Warren Ellis situation. I'm not a victim of anybody, just for full disclosure. But like, we've been facing wave after wave of these kinds of disclosures for a long time, right? But in 2015, they started to peak again. And then it started blowing up again now, and Warren Ellis was a central part of it. But the whole thing is, a lot of it is the ways that, like, harassment, abuse, these kinds of things, they happen in the moment at conventions, for sure, right? And that's usually going to be the focus of the conversation. But the thing, especially in the comic book industry, which is it's kind of a secondary professional space for that industry relative to cosplayers, photographers, and things like this. Like that is your primary social space. It's your primary workplace and these kinds of things, right? So workplace issues do get involved to everyone who works at conventions. Obviously, Alex, like you were saying, you have to take these measures both ways. But the problem is that harassers, abusers, groomers get funneled into conventions by the companies that are representing them. Like Google the name Eddie Braganza. And so the whole thing is that, like you guys were saying, that there's people who go out there, like especially like what Johnny was saying with that particular photographer, predators show up under the guise of doing these things and to recruit people. But here's the thing, sometimes you go to do a portfolio review with a guy who's representing DC Comics, Marvel, Image, Dark Horse, whatever, and he actually represents that company, and you in good faith show them your art. This becomes part of that grooming process where they become your entire world within the industry, your entire contact with the industry. They now mediate your contact with the industry. And sometimes it's like if you look up Brian Wood, who, you know, I think this is a guy who I think is really on the mend. So I don't want to like really screw them too badly, because he has reconciled with the vast majority of the people who have come forward against him. So I'm really glad to see that happening. But you have young women at conventions that approach him in good faith as just a freelance artist, you know, and writer, and say, hey, take a look at my portfolio. And so people like him have said, you know, and like this is all publicly, like he's admitted to this. So I think it's totally fair game to use his name, right? It's been reported. And like I said, there's been a lot of reconciliation. But so he would, you know, he or people like him, and there's many of them, would feign interest, you know, in these young women and say, oh yeah, I love your art. Come up to my hotel room later. Great, right? But it's like there were people who were working for these companies who were actually supposed to be talent recruiters and editors, like Eddie Braganza, who like this is the guy you're supposed to go to see this stuff. And people people knew what he was doing. There were internal HR reviews of like actual physical assaults that happened at conventions, and he was kept on in the company. This happened again at Dark Horse Comics with an editor named Scott Alley, and a lot of reports came out of how he was manipulating and controlling people and assaulting them in some cases, all based on like, I'm going to advance your career. I'm going to hook you up with names, you know. And this was the whole thing with Warren Ellis. He's this charismatic older dude with like a super intense personality, and he would bring people into his circle. And it's like, if you displease him, if he's done with you, then it's not only that he's not going to advance your career anymore, your career's done, right? So to me, I've started looking at like conventions as professional intake, right? And we can take this to all of the fields that we work in. And that was something that I really learned from you guys. I was kind of like, well, comic conventions are like a professional workspace, you know, for comics in the way they're not for other people. I'm like, no, actually cosplayers do professional networking and get gigs, and photographers do too. So it's like, this is universal. Yep. But it's like, if we treat these not just as social events and like, you know, networking events and things, but like as a place where we need to be onboarding people into our industries, right? This is your welcome to the comic book industry. You want to be an artist, you go to a convention to pitch a portfolio review or to meet your heroes or to meet your peers. So it's like, how do we start to use these spaces to educate you on the things that you could hit down the road? Because it's one thing, you know, if we bring in organizations like Hollaback that do bystander training to train volunteers, to train publisher reps or whatever, and how to deal with on-the-spot harassment. Awesome, great, perfect. But we need to teach you, we need to find ways to start teaching you the abusive dynamics that you're going to encounter in the industry. We want to try to catch you immediately as you're coming in. I don't know what that looks like. I fully don't. Yeah, I want to be here to articulate and say, how do we do this? And start that conversation.
That's a really important conversation to have too, especially you mentioned Hollaback. There is also an organization within the more anime con and other nerdy con arenas, which is called Uplift. And they are another organization that I volunteer with. They have a conventions team. They actually will work with and train the staff and the con chairs and everybody who's, you know, involved. Hopefully the volunteers, I can't speak to necessarily that portion of it, but they'll work with you to have a policy in place, and they will have presence at the convention so so that you see that the convention wants people like them there. And I think that influence is something that's going to help the community as well. Another point I'd like to bring up in light of a conversation we were having yesterday before we started recording is that Mom the Cosplayer brought up something really, really important. There are a lot of posts going around these days in either Facebook convention groups or unofficial or whatever, where people see that there's a problem and they say, well, if you feel unsafe, you can always come to me. No. See, because that provides cover for all of the predators who do the exact same thing. You might be in good faith. You might say, you know, I really want to help somebody. It might have helped somebody in the past, and maybe you think you're doing a really good thing, but there is no way to know who is safe except for the convention. The convention must be the one with the onus to have safety procedures and policy in place. They must be the ones to do the training. You are not supposed to be expected to find your own personal bodyguard at a convention. And finally, on that note for that post, who the heck do you think you are that somebody's going to remember you from an internet post? Oh my God, I got to go to that safe person. Who do you think you are?
Now, I know a lot of people like to play characters.
Comics do that though, that you would know, right?
So,
yeah, I was gonna say a lot of people like to play characters, but being a white knight is not it. That's not.
I mean, so
do you have that training? Do you have that expertise? Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And then some people have organizations that are, you know, or not organizations, just they have, you know, pins, like the person who had the Cosplay Is Not Consent pin on the whole time. Yeah, so they're saying, oh, yeah, I'm definitely safe because look at what I believe in. And then on the side, I'm going to harass and treat people terribly and stalk them even. Like, that's how do you vet somebody unless they absolutely have the qualifications? And how do you control that unless it is the convention itself teaching its staff and providing education for, you know, would-be offenders as well, people who might just be socially awkward and not know how to interact with cosplayers or other people at the convention. They might just not really know, and then they end up doing something that somebody perceives as creepy, and now they're just falling into that hole. So education all around, training all around, qualifications for these people, bystander intervention training, very important.
Yeah, the only person I would do that for is my wife, but she's like constantly with me anyway. So
yeah, that's a different story for sure.
But I mean, I've had people kind of like raise that concern with me before, and I'm like, dude, like, you know where to go. Like, we have convention staff for a reason, and if they're not willing to take that responsibility, you need to put them to the task and make them accountable for the fact that they're not pulling their own weight. Right?
Because I mean, like, staff also need to be accountable.
Exactly. And I think that this is actually one of the things that Trixie is bringing up. Like, I think in general, it's a very valid point, is that we do have this amazing tool. You know, like, I mean, the internet is kind of awesome because we can sort of like amplify a lot of these signals and put a lot of this information out there and really collect and gather receipts, and just kind of like, Twitter is like pretty much the ideal platform for this, like, as toxic as it is, right? Because you can put that shit out there and be like, okay, boom, here's the receipts, here's all of the information, here's how this convention sucks, like, how are we going to fix this, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
I one thing I want to also kind of echo too what Emma's saying is like, yeah, you know, when you do talk about places being professional spaces and stuff like that, that word should not just be thrown around loosely, but yeah, it is in fact that. And if people are going to consider themselves as professionals, then the environments also need to be handled in that same fashion, which also means that, you know, these conversations are so important that people need to be held accountable, because just because it's a con and, you know, wherever and not in Hollywood, California, doesn't mean that it shouldn't hold the same standards. And I think that's very important, because it should be no grooming process, or it should not be no, this is the way of the business. All of that trash needs to be thrown out of there. And before that's done, then you cannot deem it as a professional, as a professional, until it is. And I think that's just the easiest way to kind of go about it, is that a lot of like status quos need to be thrown out there. Professional cosplayer, professional photographers, professional cons, in other words, like, it should not be deemed unless it earns that merit.
Right. And now we have a really unique opportunity during this time of pandemic where we're not having conventions. if conventions aren't sitting here and going, how can we make our attendees safer? Do you really want to support that convention when it starts up again?
Yeah, exactly.
Too. And you can reach out to conventions and tell them, like, I found, these gaps in your harassment policy, or something happened to me at your con, and, it really sucked, and I wish that there were resources, and, just reaching out to them can do a lot. It can do so much good and just turn things around while we have the time.
Well,
yeah, no,
Alex
completely
had a great point about kind of the quasi-professional status of these industries that we're in, right? And the whole thing, it's like you're saying before, that these things are blowing up, cosplay is blowing up, and like comic books are getting huge in the way that like Hollywood is now in. So where companies could fly with like these loose standards and predators could, take root, now there's so much outside scrutiny that it's creating this bonkers dynamic of chaos, because we're trying to professionalize these spaces and make them safer, at the same time that like the freewheeling culture that built up around them initially made them a hotbed for abuse.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and like another thing like that not to forget is that it's not just like us as like like adults 21 up. It's places where there's a lot of kids, and like you can't just go up and be like, oh, like, are you 11? Like, you can't tell a person's age, and you shouldn't be just approaching random people and start just like assuming that you can just like just chill because that's kind of a space. No, it is not. Like, everybody, different races, different sexualities, different ages are in this space. So you have to remember that like it's not just a space for adults. Like, not everyone can understand that. Like, when I went to convention when I was like in 8th grade, I like my first convention, I clearly like thought it was just like me and my friends hanging out, but a lot of the things around me clearly were not. And there were like you realize that as you age, because you realize that you have more experience for those sort of things. But like as a kid, you don't really see those red flags and the signals that like maybe a person shouldn't be just photographing and following me around. That's kind of creepy, but who do I report to? And also I'm a kid, so like I don't really see all these like mentor figures or like someone clearly there being like, hi, do you need any help? Like,
absolutely,
you feel free to report to me.
I'm sorry, I do have to like run in just like 2 seconds, but before I go, I want to leave you guys with 2 words: yaoi paddles.
Oh no! Dark times.
We banned those. Why can't we ban all this other behavior?
Dark
times. Right. So that's an example of doing that right.
I want to piggyback off of Nikki's point again. I so wholeheartedly feel everything you're saying, and that's what really gets under my skin, is that people tend to forget that these places are family friendly and of all ages. So there's little kids there, the biggest consumers of them all, because the world is so big to them. So what they see and what they're exposed to either motivates them, it's sponged in one way or another. And regardless of what it is, we should always want to be something mentors or something that these kids can look up to. And the generations behind us are only going to get better if we're doing our job right now. And God knows, especially with everything that's happening right now with the pandemic, this generation now is not taking no for an answer. They're standing up for everything they believe in, and that's just so powerful. But even in our small spaces in these cons, we have a job to do as well too, so that the generation behind us can go to cons and realize that it's a safe spot to cosplay whoever you want to make friends, to be safe, have a good time as it should be. And I think that's part of our job, is to be able to paint what's right and what's wrong, and and hold everybody accountable. And my last point is that, like, people have to understand too, no matter what, you're not bigger than the con. The con is always why we're there. No one's there for nobody else. And I think that's where some of the issues come from, because some people are so circumvented around it being about a particular attraction that it becomes so much about that you lose focus about everything. And the most important thing, and that's community. And community does involve people of all ages, all ethnicities, all sexualities, and so on. And it should always be about that. But
absolutely, yeah.
And like,
you know,
oh no, I don't want to interrupt. Like,
I was just gonna say.
Okay, I just wanted to get a quick thing, is that there's only not just the convention, but also we got to remember that there's also the way to the convention, because that's where you met with the exterior, where if inside of the con, preferably, you know, if you have the community, people understand what you're interested in, but then outside of that, you have people who have no understanding of that, who, you know, might think that cosplay is consent. So you have to remember that there are also, you have to protect yourself from people who, you know, not familiar with the community, that understands you and have certain, you know, understanding of what we're going through. So on the way, how you're getting there, remember to be cautious there and the harassment that might happen there. And then the after parties, that's like a whole different discussion, is that like, that's a different environment where now you've transitioned from like semi-professional to professional area into a party area, where there's a whole other type of behavior and how to avoid harassment there, because that's like a whole other set of mentality and people who are going in with different intentions, and kind of like be aware of the red flags because of how you're behaving there and how people might be approaching you there. That's a whole other thing to also discuss, but that is still within the convention atmosphere, because it's all like, you know, gradually transitioning from one to the other.
Right, absolutely.
That's something I would also like to also add in there too. Like, there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of these conventions to change. And I do like the fact that the younger generation, Gen Z, is really speaking up and just, again, not taking no for an answer. I like that attitude, because I've been in the convention scene since Anime Expo 1999. And there was this mentality, I don't know why it was there in the first place, but if you were speaking up against sexism, racism, or any type of otherism, you are deemed as the one that starts drama.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's silenced a lot of us who really wanted to say something. Like, I wish I had the tools and the background to say something against sexism in the Bay Area. Like, yeah, as woke as the Bay Area may appear to be, like, oh my God, I got stories about just like sexism incidents back there, but we have like all these tools available to us. There is opportunity for change, and I encourage anyone listening to this roundtable discussion, definitely speak up and say something to your favorite conventions, because they're not going to shut us up.
Right. They can't ignore us if there's a million of us.
I mean, exactly. Plus, like, you're paying money to go there. Please be responsible. Otherwise, you're going to lose all of us. You're not going to be making money, all of those events.
I mean,
so Johnny, what were you going to say?
Yeah, it actually works. Harassment also includes, I'm not bringing up another topic, but harassment also includes bullying and
it does. Straight up.
Everything. There was actually one cosplayer that, after me and my friends just advocating for ourselves, she was removed from their like roster for a cosplay guest. We were like, yeah, this is good, like, change that we want to see. There's plenty of conventions, big or small, our voices matter. So
definitely, that's very hard.
I was going to say quickly, if everybody can kind of go around, because, you know, we're speaking in a lot of detail, but also a little bit vague about what exactly harassment is. And I'll just say that, like, whenever the word no is in play and you continue to proceed beyond that, is considered harassment, no matter what it is. If a person doesn't want to hang with you, I know hanging sounds like the most like the most regular thing, but if a person is your friend and that person said they don't want to hang with you and you continue to pursue that, that is called harassment, people. You cannot do that.
Harassment is also very importantly defined by the target or the victim of the harassment. It cannot be defined by the harasser, because you don't get to decide who you hurt.
That's so true.
Yes, yeah.
I was exactly at the convention because of this group of people that I don't want to hang out with. I was like, oh, I'm gonna leave, and they followed me down the escalator.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, also asking for permission. You're still in the space, but there's a bunch of strangers that you can't just come up and just do whatever. You have to make sure that, hey, are you okay with me, like, taking a picture or like saying hello or whatever? Like saying a comment like great cosplay, cool, and moving along, it's one thing. But staying there and like waiting on them to do things and not stop, like, talking or
anything. And throwing your camera up in their face. I see it all the time.
Exactly.
Ask permission. Yeah, or just like, oh, we're cosplaying from the same series. Now we're best friends. You know, kind of, oh, no,
it's like, I don't know you.
One you don't know.
Yeah, assuming you can just hug somebody. I mean, come on now. Somebody's personal space. Whenever you enter that, exactly. Entering somebody's personal space, touching them, hugging, whatever it may be, without consent. And consent means without permission, and permission means without asking and getting acceptance. It's harassment up and down the board, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's just a mentality that just really needs to stop. Wherein, like, oh, that person has the mental issue. They're not really harassing you. I'm like, dude, don't use mental health.
Oh boy,
as an excuse for someone's excuse, because that does not excuse it. And I have to use so much emotional labor to tell like friends and colleagues, mental health does not excuse bad behavior.
Yep.
Yes. Accountability. Absolutely.
Ari, do you want better? Or the whole like, oh, they're just like that, so it's okay. No, that's
broken stairs. Broken stairs, y'all. It's a thing. It sucks.
The one thing I wanted to say
is not a personality.
Oh, am I? Yeah.
The one thing I want to say under the rubric of like family friendly, and I definitely know this was not the intent of that, so this is definitely not call it at all. But like one thing I was thinking about is that like that's a rubric that gets used for a lot of atrocious homophobia and transphobia, right? So like I fully know what you mean by saying family friendly, and yeah, we want to protect the kids in that space. And so what we need to watch for is like the J.K. Rowlings of the world, you know, but it's kind of this idea of like, hi, look at me, I'm a trans woman drag queen, right? I am coded as a threat. I am going to take your children and I'm going to, you know, indoctrinate them into this lifestyle or that lifestyle. Like my existence as a woman is coded as being lewd and sexual, just as like, you know, a fact of my existing, right? And so like you know, you look at how like drag queen story time is under attack across the United States, because it's like, oh, well, we cannot, even if it's this cisgender male drag queen, like, oh no, we can't let the children be exposed to these things, right? Because, and you know, it's a brilliant model for these awful people, because guess what? We kind of are possibility models. Like, I'm not here to tell your kids to get into the transgender lifestyle. You know, ask your parents for like blockers or whatever when you're a little kid. Like, obviously that's not what I'm here to do. That's not who I am to be. But it's like the regulation of how I can exist in public. Like you look at that ordinance about homeless shelters going on the Trump administration. This is how they work, right? Is they take public spaces, your ability to exist in public, and they're restricted in the fringe cases around the world, like around those places, like military service, places that the left don't even like, right? Or you know, homeless shelters, and they use abuse against women as like a bad faith argument, right? So there's always these ways that they circle around to like push trans people, LGBT people across the entire spectrum out of public spaces and out of public life. And like protecting the children is a huge rubric for that in the United States because of just where the cultural space is. So the thing is, we need to always be finding ways like, how do we protect the expression of these kids who are trying to find themselves in these spaces? Because we talked about like, you know, cosplaying as trans, and we were kind of mostly talking about that from an adult perspective. But like, if young adults are coming into these convention spaces and their parents back home are not supportive, we need to protect their safety. We need to make sure they're not being tagged in Facebook photos that are being sent back to their parents. We need to make sure that their legal names are not visible to all of these convention goers. We need to know these things, right? So like, it's cute to get up and cosplay in front of the Westboro Baptist Church with their stupid signs in San Diego and like give them the finger or like whatever, like counter protest. Like, that's cute. But it's like, let's be aware of the erosion of our ability to exist in public that is far, far more like, what's the word? It's not invisible, but it's just below the surface in those kinds of ways. So we always want to look at like, we want to stop harassment, but we also want to protect expression.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd love to give a shout out really quickly to a con that does and has been starting to really protect the voices of LGBTQIA people. TECO specifically has in their harassment policy that bathroom policing is harassment, and
Yes,
they
honey.
define what it is, and they are not shy to tell you, like, you are not allowed to misgender a person in any context. That's not right. And calling that for what it is really important step in making sure that we can have safety for everybody, because a con can be good to somebody, but if it's not safe for everyone, then it's not safe. That does not make it a good con. So you need to make sure that everybody is safe first before anybody can say, yeah, that's a really great convention. Let's go there and support them with our money, right? So we got to encourage our communities to do
just
better.
Because some are safe doesn't mean that everybody is.
Yeah,
Right.
in layman's term,
free, nobody's free.
Yeah, I was gonna say, in layman's term, at the completion of the con, when you heard your drama and rumors that went about, there should be none of that. That's how you can identify if you went to something good or not.
Yeah.
Right,
I won't point the fingers at no con, but we know what we're talking about.
we all know. We all know. It's fine. So I suppose that's a pretty great conclusion if we can wrap it up. I have a bunch of resources for everybody to take a look at. I'll start with resources specifically for survivors of sexual assault. I think we briefly touched on SoManyOfUs.com in our previous one. The survivors of Warren Ellis came together and put together a tremendous resource page on top of all their testimonies, and to read any of that is just it's a fount of information. There's just so much there. Whatever you've experienced, they have a resource for it. There's also RAINN, that's the national network for rape, abuse, incest, all that sort of stuff, as well as 1in6.org. That is the statistic for men in their lifetimes have a 1 in 6 chance of experiencing sexual assault, and there's a lot of stigma attached to that. There are also a lot of mental health resources out there that are important. Right now, with the political atmosphere being what it is, we need to center Black voices and Black mental health for sure. So blackmentalhealthmatters.carrd.co is a great resource that lists multiple places that you can go. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline is another great one. And it's not just the calling in, you can text them too. And some places even have messaging. I believe the Trans Lifeline does that as well. But they are suicidepreventionlifeline.org and 1-800-273-8255. Please, if you're feeling anything like you are in trouble, consider reaching out to them. It can be via text. It can be a nonverbal thing, especially if that's something that's, an issue for you with what you're going through. We also need to talk about anti-racism, because that is a big part of harassment in our community. Anti-racism resources can include, but are not limited to, these ones that I found here. The womensfoundation.org/anti-racism-resources is a great page to look at. They've got a lot of stuff going on. And there's another one for businesses and companies as well, which is bcorporation.net/anti-racism-resources. And I would encourage conventions especially, and people who are in the professional sphere to look more toward that sort of a thing. Now, when it comes specifically to our community in conventions, as I mentioned before, I run the Cosplayer Survivor Support Network, and we have a website, cosplayer-ssn.org, where we have a harassment policy report card, and that lists about 6 qualities that a convention harassment policy has to have in order to be considered the bottom line of what it will do to protect you. Now, conventions can go above and beyond, and that is great, but if they don't even meet the 6 out of 6, they are not safe. They are not safe at all, because one of those, the most important ones of those, is making sure that everybody is held accountable, including the staff who you're supposed to report to, including con chairs, including guests. All of those important factors need to be put in place for everybody to be safe. We are also working on an accountability report card for the number of guests that they've invited that are marginalized, that are Black, people of color, BIPOC specifically, people who are trans, people who are disabled. Are they inviting plus size cosplay guests? Are they inviting, intersectional areas of guests? And it's really important that conventions start to see that. So we are going to be putting that up relatively soon. It will be a heck of an effort to do. So if you can help us at all, we will have a submission form. You can tell us what you know about your convention that's publicly available, and we can show them some hard statistics, because unfortunately that's the only way that some conventions will notice or change. And lastly, I did also mention Uplift, uplifttogether.org. They also have a website that's called conresources.org, specifically for people who run conventions to go to, where they will tell you, they'll work with you on a sliding scale to put in place a better harassment policy. CSSN can tell you what your gaps are. Uplift can actually help you fill them. And they can also train everybody who's involved to make sure that they have the qualifications needed to handle disclosure. So all of those resources are just the tip of the iceberg in the conversation that we're having about harassment, stalking, bullying, abuse, and sexual assault in this community in all of the far-reaching corners of it. So I think I've said enough. I think we've had a fantastic conversation. Yeah. Thank you all so much for sticking around and having this extra special lightning round with us.